Okay, I promised to show you this video about perfect squares, and this becomes really important when you get to middle school and certainly high school, when we start to do a lot of algebra and we have a lot of perfect squares that we use in equations, such as when we get to 5x squared plus 2x plus 1. And we start to graph these equations, and they're not going to be straight lines anymore. We're not talking about linear algebra anymore. So when you get to these equations, if you're able to deal with whatever value x is, and when we square it, if you can deal with these in your head, it really becomes an advantage to you. So one of the ways that I was trying when I was in high school was to find a way that we could get the kids to figure out in their head the perfect squares to 25. There really wasn't much of a way for them to do it without having to use a calculator and just write them out. So I started looking at them in regards to the fact that there's always relationships involved when we deal with mathematics, which makes it a very practical pursuit. So one of the things you can do is, if you look at up to 25, is there some way that we can just write them over a 2-week period and they'll just start to come to us? Well, one of the ways that you can do this without a calculator is pretty simple. And I finally figured out what the pattern was to this. And so I started to have my kids in middle school, certainly in 7th and 8th grade, and into high school, writing them down once a day, every day for 2 weeks, and they were surprised at how many they were able to memorize. So 1 squared is 1. And the trick to this is basically just add the next odd number will give you the answer to the next number squared. So 1 squared is 1. The next odd number is 3. 1 plus 3 is 4. Well, that's the answer to 2 squared. 2 squared is 4. If we add the next odd number, which is 5, 4 plus 5 is 9, and that's the answer to 3 squared. Well, 3 squared is 9. The next odd number is 7. 9 plus 7 is 16, and that's the answer to 4 squared. So 16 plus the next odd number, which is 9, is 25. That's the answer to 5 squared. 25 plus the next odd number is 11. That's 36. Well, that's the answer to 6 squared. 36 plus the next odd number is 13, is 49. That's the next answer to 7 squared. 49 plus the next odd number is 15 is equal to 64, and that's 8 squared. 8 squared, 64 plus 17 is 81. That's the answer to 9 squared. 81 plus 19, which is the next odd number, is 100. 10 squared is 100. 100 plus the next odd number is 21. 121 is the answer to 11 squared. 11 squared, 121 plus 23 is 144. That's the answer to 12 squared. And finally, on this first column, 13 squared is 69, plus the next odd number is 196. Now, the other thing that the kids can think about, and I've written them all out to 25, which is 625. I promise you, if they would write these for 14 days in a row, one time on a piece of paper, they're going to be surprised at how many they remember. Now, the next thing that I would like for them to consider is that, let's say that we had 36 squared. Now, we don't necessarily have to know what the answer to that is, but I can tell you that if you just look at 36 and know that 6 times 6 is 36, the answer in the 1 column has to be 6. 6 times 6 is 36. That number that's going to be in the ones place is going to be a 6. So the other thing that we could take a look at is if we had 36, and we could say, okay, I don't need to necessarily know the answer, but 30 times 30 is going to be 900. I have 2 zeros, and 3 times 3 is 9. I also know at the other end of that, it's going to be 40. So between 30 and 40, I know I'm going to have 900, and 400 squared is going to be 2 zeros and 16, which is 1600. So I know that my answer has to be somewhere between 900 and 1600. So if your professor gave you a test and gave you a multiple choice question for 36 squared, I would first be looking at an answer that had a 6 in the ones place. So these are some tricks, but if the kids will just learn their perfect squares to 25, that's going to be most of the questions that are going to be asked when you're dealing with it. And I know you can use a calculator for a lot of this, but it really becomes more important that if you can start to memorize some of these key math facts, it will really help you in the long run. So I hope this chart is some help, and you can just sit and get out a piece of lined notebook paper and just start writing them. And once you get the answer to 1, just start adding the next odd number, which after 1 is 3. Just write this list out for the next couple of weeks, and you'll be surprised at how many you've memorized.